Ian Paisley, MP. You're here today for the Global Tobacco and Nicotine Forum. Why are you here?
Well, I was asked to give a perspective on how regulations actually impact very directly on real people. And of course, I have some very significant impact of regulation with regards to tobacco regulation in my constituency. 1,000 people lost their jobs because of regulations. And those regulations, I think, need to be rigorously tested, rigorously put under the microscope, and people to ask the question, were they necessary? Were the sacrifice of these jobs necessary against those regulations? And that was the point I was making today, and I hope that people recognise that good regulation will lead to job security. Bad regulation will have unintended consequences of increased smuggling in the tobacco industry, and we'll see legitimate jobs being lost.
One problem with that is that, of course, tobacco is associated with addiction and death. And some people will say, well, it is a great tragedy to lose those jobs, but there is a wider public health benefit.
Well, of course, the regulations that I'm addressing are that people told me that these regulations, when they were introduced, would save people's lives and would lead to people reducing their smoking intake. None of that happened. All that happened was people lost jobs. And it's getting that balance right. I'm a health advocate. I don't smoke. I don't encourage smoking. But tobacco is a legal product. Unless the government and the regulators are going to be less hypocritical and say they want to actually ban the substance altogether, that would be a very, very different stance, and that would provoke a different argument. But the reality is that these regulations were about supposedly stopping people smoking. Not one single person has stopped smoking as a result of the Tobacco Directive from Europe. Not one single person will stop smoking because of the font size on a cigarette pack.
Would you therefore support a full prohibition of tobacco?
I think that would be absolutely crazy. It would be a counterfeiters and smugglers charter. And remember, the sort of people we're talking about aren't nice people smuggling. They're the same people who engage in prostitution smuggling, and people smuggling, and human slavery smuggling, and in terrorism in Northern Ireland. These are the people who make money out of smuggling. Do we really want to help those people? Because this is not the way you stop smoking. You stop smoking by educating people, informing them, and giving them choices. And indeed, the industry and the private sector seems to be pushing the choices more readily, like, for example, nicotine-free products, like, for example, the electric cigarette and the devices in that way. That's the way people should be encouraged to go, and where regulators should be encouraging people to go, not just having this almost saintly approach that all these people give you cancer. It's just not true.
1,000 jobs have been lost in your constituency. We now have Brexit approaching. The Leave campaign is a campaign that you supported as an MP. What will you be saying to Theresa May, Prime Minister, in her negotiations with the EU on what happens next? What is good for Northern Ireland's economy?
Well, of course, Brexit opens up a huge opportunity now for us in terms of trade negotiations and getting it right, getting our trade relationship properly established, putting us in the driving seat of trade. And I hope that that's what Theresa May is really going to be engaged in. And all the early discussions and indications are that's exactly what this is going to be about. Trade will now drive the political dynamic in this instead of the other way around. And, you know, it's traders, it's people who make and manufacture things. It's their interests that we should really be interested in, because they're creating the jobs. They're giving people in my constituency the opportunity to get fair employment and, importantly, to get a good living wage. And we want to push those trade deals. Remember, it was because of Brexit, because of the arguments around that in terms of Europe over-regulating trade, that led to a lot of people in my constituency saying, enough is enough. We're sick of this. No matter how much largesse you give us from Europe, we're still going to oppose this. And that's why my constituency actually voted to leave the EU.
But the EU gives you access to the single market, but it also, full memberships, gives you the possibility of being around that negotiating table when they're making regulations, the sort of regulations that you want, better regulations. Has the UK lost out in this way?
Well, I actually think practically they haven't. After all, we've been round that table for the last 40 years. We've pushed against these regulations, and the regulations have been pushed upon us. The edicts from Brussels have been put on us, and I think that this now says to us, enough is enough. We'll negotiate what's good for our people, for our workers, and we'll get a good trade relationship. And let's remember, Europe will trade with the United Kingdom. They need to sell their Mercedes, their BMWs, their fromage, all of the goods that they make here brilliantly, their Belgian chocolate, their ice cream. We still want to buy it. We're a willing market, so make a good trade deal with us.